The world held its breath. For weeks, tensions had been building between the superpowers. It began with a border dispute between China and India in the Himalayas. Russia, in a show of force, mobilized troops along the Ukrainian border. The United States responded with naval exercises in the South China Sea. Each action was a calculated provocation, a dangerous game of geopolitical chess. Mistrust festered, fueled by misinformation and inflammatory rhetoric. Social media became a battleground of propaganda. News outlets, eager for ratings, amplified the fear and outrage. The world watched with a growing sense of dread. This was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The spark came unexpectedly. A small, unmarked aircraft was shot down near Taiwan. Each side blamed the other, accusations flying like missiles. The incident, whether accidental or intentional, became the catalyst. The fragile peace, already strained to its breaking point, shattered.
Inside Cheyenne Mountain, the heart of North American aerospace defense, alarms shrieked. The screens, normally awash in the mundane data of air traffic, now pulsed with the crimson markers of potential threats. Generals and technicians, faces grim, hunched over their consoles, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The unthinkable was happening.
Across the globe, similar scenes unfolded. In the Kremlin, the Russian president, flanked by stone-faced advisors, received the chilling news. His Chinese counterpart, in the Zhongnan High compound, listened intently as his generals whispered urgent updates. The world was now a network of interconnected war rooms, each a crucible of fear and uncertainty. The news spread like wildfire. Television screens flickered with breaking reports, the anchors' voices tight with anxiety. Social media exploded, a torrent of fear, anger, and disbelief. The world watched, horrified, as the doomsday clock ticked closer to midnight. The unthinkable was no longer unthinkable. It was happening. President Thompson, his face etched with fatigue, sat in the Oval Office. The weight of the world quite literally rested on his shoulders. Around him, his cabinet members argued, their voices a cacophony of tension and fear. The military advisors urged a swift, decisive response. The diplomats pleaded for restraint, for one last chance at dialogue. In Moscow and Beijing, similar debates raged. The stakes were too high, the consequences too terrifying to contemplate. Every leader faced the same agonizing dilemma: respond in kind and risk an apocalyptic exchange, or seek a peaceful resolution and appear weak, vulnerable.
Thompson, his hand trembling slightly, reached for the phone. He had to speak to the other leaders, had to find a way out of this madness. But the lines were dead. Communication, the lifeline of diplomacy, had been severed. They were alone, adrift in a sea of fear and mistrust, with only minutes to avert catastrophe.
In the streets below, chaos reigned. The initial shock had given way to panic. People poured out of office buildings, desperate to get home, to their families. Cars jammed the roads, horns blaring in a symphony of fear. The air crackled with a strange energy, a mixture of terror and disbelief. Could this really be happening? Memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, long relegated to history books and documentaries, now felt terrifyingly real. The images of the mushroom clouds, the stories of the survivors, the sheer unimaginable horror of it all, haunted the collective consciousness. Was this to be their fate, their legacy?
In homes and shelters, families huddled together, seeking solace in each other's embrace. Parents hugged their children tight, whispering reassurances they barely believed themselves. Prayers were whispered, tears were shed, goodbyes exchanged. The world waited, holding its breath, bracing for the unimaginable.
Unbeknownst to the terrified masses, a glimmer of hope emerged from an unexpected source. A small group of international diplomats, refusing to give up, had established a back-channel communication.
Working feverishly, they relayed messages between the capitals, desperate to find a way out of the abyss. Their message was simple, yet profound. Stop this madness.
Appealing to the leaders' humanity, they reminded them of the stakes, the millions of lives hanging in the balance. The world held its breath. Every news channel, every radio station, every online platform carried their plea. The message was translated into every language, broadcast on every frequency, a desperate chorus for sanity in a world teetering on the brink. Would anyone listen? S3, Media Group, diplomats in a meeting, peace talks, people holding peace signs, diverse crowd listening to a speech at stock at distribute_equally. They spoke of the shared future, the need for dialogue, for understanding, for peace. Time, once a constant and abstract concept, now took on a terrifying urgency. Every second ticked by with agonizing slowness, each tick a hammer blow to the collective consciousness. The news channels, abandoning any pretense of regular programming, switched to countdown clocks, their digital faces a stark reminder of the impending doom.
5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3.
The numbers seemed to burn themselves into the minds of those watching, a macabre countdown to oblivion. Inside the war rooms, the tension was palpable. Fingers hovered over buttons, decisions with unimaginable consequences hanging by the thinnest of threads. The world prayed. In churches, temples, mosques, and synagogues, people knelt, heads bowed, seeking divine intervention. Atheists and agnostics, their skepticism momentarily forgotten, found themselves hoping, praying for a miracle. The fate of humanity rested on a knife's edge. 1 minute, 30 seconds. The world held its breath. In the Oval Office, President Thompson, his face a mask of anguish, closed his eyes. He could feel the weight of every life, every hope, every dream resting on his decision. A single word, a nod, a flick of his wrist could unleash a firestorm that would consume the world. The phone rang. It was the back channel. Thompson, his heart pounding in his chest, picked up the receiver.
Mr. President, we have a response. They're willing to talk. They're standing down.
Relief washed over him, so profound it was almost physical. He relayed the news to his advisors, the words catching in his throat. The room, so full of tension moments ago, now erupted in cheers and applause. They had pulled back from the brink. For now. The news spread like wildfire, extinguishing the fear that had gripped the world. The countdown clocks, once harbingers of doom, now flickered with messages of hope and relief. People poured out into the streets, not in panic, but in celebration. Strangers hugged, tears of joy streamed down their faces, the shared brush with annihilation forging a bond of humanity. The crisis, however, was far from over. The underlying tensions, the mistrust, the geopolitical gamesmanship, all remained. The world had been given a reprieve, a second chance. But how long would it last? The diplomats, their work far from finished, continued their delicate dance, working tirelessly to bridge the divides. The world watched, waited, and hoped. The near miss had been a stark reminder of the fragility of peace, the ever-present threat of annihilation. It was a lesson they could not afford to forget. As the world slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, a profound question lingered in the air. Could they learn from this? Could they find a way to coexist peacefully, to set aside their differences and work together for the common good? Or would they continue down the path of mistrust and aggression, forever flirting with disaster? The answer, as always, lay in the hands of humanity. The near miss had exposed the abyss, the terrifying consequences of their actions. They had stared into the face of oblivion and recoiled in horror. But would they remember the lesson? The world watched, waited, and hoped. The future, once bright with promise, now seemed shrouded in uncertainty. The shadow of the near miss stretched long and dark, a constant reminder of the stakes, the fragility of peace, and the ever-present threat of annihilation. The world had been warned. Would they listen?